If you want to crush your job interviews, get higher grades, and build a network that can help you create leverage through your career, this is the video for you, because we're going to be talking about how you can do that using Twitter in a way that most students don't, but all students should. So let's get right to it. I'm Ashley, the MBA Coach, and what we do here on this channel is make videos to help you get the most out of the time and the money that you're spending on your MBA. And I'm talking about things like productivity skills and job search, interview skills, public speaking, the whole 9 yards. Today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest challenges students face when they're interviewing, how to use Twitter to fix that, why people are not typically doing it this way right now, and then finally, the specific tactics and techniques that you can use in order to do it. So make sure you stick around for that. One of the biggest challenges for students, especially for students in interviews, is that there's a huge knowledge gap that exists between your interviewer and you. And it comes from what you do on a day-to-day basis. Your interviewer is doing M&A transactions, maybe launching a marketing campaign, maybe out there doing sales calls with clients, getting real-world experience. In contrast, you're in school learning academic theory, and when you get to the interview, you're taking that plus whatever real-world experience you have in order to do that interview. And there's this big gap that exists. What you can do by using Twitter wisely is help shrink that gap, which is good, but as you're doing that, you're growing the gap versus the other candidates. And this is where you can really stand out, because a couple of things will happen. One, you'll know a lot more than other people, so you'll become a lot more credible candidate. You'll just be more knowledgeable as you're talking to the interview. What else happens is that you will come across as someone who really is interested in the industry, who's much more passionate about it, and who actually cares and thinks about these things. So your goal using Twitter should be to take your interview and turn it into something that's a lot more like a conversation between two peers, two equals. Again, you're not going to get there, but that's the goal. What Twitter is great for is it essentially enables you to listen in on conversations between people who are really knowledgeable in those fields. It helps you gather and accumulate the news and knowledge of what's going on, and it puts you in a position where you're able to shrink that knowledge gap. The beauty of Twitter is that if you do this over time, your knowledge will compound. It'll become a lot more intuitive to you. What also ends up happening is that you end up getting higher grades because you just know more. When you go into class and participate in classroom discussions, as you've gathered and learned all this information from using Twitter effectively, you're actually able to contribute in a different way than you would have before. When you're writing papers and when you're writing assignments, you're bringing in more real-world knowledge. Think about it this way. Let's say you were going in for an interview, and the week before, you had an in-depth conversation with 10 peers of that person you're going to be meeting. In addition to that, you also had a conversation and listen in on a conversation with their boss and their boss's boss. And you've managed to accrue some of that knowledge. When you go into that interview, you are going to be so much more credible and so much more knowledgeable than many of the other candidates. Now, why do people do this? Well, people share a lot of information on Twitter partly because they want to share it and they want to help other people. But a big part of it too is that they're building their own credibility on there. By sharing their knowledge, they become much more credible as well. So why isn't everyone doing this? Hopefully now it's obvious that it makes sense now that I've explained it to you. I think there's a few reasons. One is that most people just don't know about how you would do this or don't even realize it's a good idea. They avoid Twitter because it's known to be shouty and political and everyone's angry. And there is some truth to that. But you can find these oases of knowledge where there are these really valuable and really nice, in a lot of cases, people sharing knowledge and engaging and interacting. The second reason I think is that the algorithm itself is kind of working against you. The algorithm is essentially there to keep you engaged and to keep you enraged. And the more of both of those you are, better a business model this is for social media companies. And then the final reason is it takes some effort to set this up. It's actually very easy to scroll through once you have it set up, but it does take a little effort to set it up in the first place. So now that we've covered those three things, let's get into the specifics of how do you do this. And for that, we're gonna go to the computer. Okay, so we're at the computer now, and we're gonna talk about the specifics of how to use Twitter to grow that knowledge base that you have, to shrink the gap versus your interviewer, and to grow the gap versus other candidates. We're gonna talk about 5 things. We're gonna talk about Twitter lists, Tweetdeck, mastering Twitter search, using bookmarks, and finally, shortcut keys. Twitter is really useful, but it can be a big problem at the same time. Because what ends up happening is if you spend too much time, or spend any time really, in your main feed, what you're coming across are ads, older tweets from people you follow, some of the tweets from people you follow. They don't actually show you all of them. Popular tweets out there in the world, in some cases, and then sometimes they even show you suggested tweets saying, oh, if you like this person, you might like this one. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of information all jammed into one place, and it's just not a very effective way to go about things. So in order to avoid that, we use Twitter lists. Twitter lists have only the tweets from people you want to follow, or that you add to the list, and it has all of their tweets in chronological order. So let's jump to the computer now, and I'll show you how to make some lists. We're gonna make 5 lists. Well, what you should do is make 5 lists. We're not gonna make them all today. Finance, marketing, productivity, self-improvement kind of stuff, business news, which is obviously very important to keep on top of, and then finally, a catch-all called interesting, where you put people who don't really fit in any of those other categories. If anything I'm saying is not really familiar to you, I'm gonna run through this relatively quickly, because otherwise it's gonna get pretty boring for everyone. So I'm gonna move through it relatively quickly. But what I have done is I've created a Twitter thread that goes through all this stuff in great detail. It's linked below in the description. So if anything here you need to figure out how to do, I've got you covered, so go ahead and check on that. And here, so we're starting in my main feed, and here what we see is, like right off the top of my feed is an ad. It's a promoted tweet. And it's a tweet from someone who I follow, but from 9 hours ago. And then, well, you might like this person's tweet, and that one is 10 hours ago. So really what's happening here is, it's like a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. So what we want to do is create lists. So you go more lists. And we're going to create a new list, and we're going to call it Marketing 101. 101. The description is fairly self-evident. I will generally make my lists private. I don't have a great reason to. The way I've generally operated with social media is I start most private and then gradually release and open up more. And as people get more experience, that's often how they do it. So that's what I would recommend for you to start with. So now we've got a name rather, it's private. We're gonna go next because now we have to add people to the list. So think about who are people who are in marketing that you might know about. One person I would suggest is someone named April Dunford, who wrote a terrific book called Obviously Awesome. Highly recommend reading it. I'm probably going to talk about it on the channel sometime later on. So we've now added her. You see I pressed add there, and we click done. And voila, we have our first list built for Marketing 101. And then gradually over time, what's going to happen is you're going to add people to this list. One thing I didn't mention is, if we go back here to the list page, here you see it showing up Marketing 101. I would pin this list. And what you'll find is on your mobile app, you'll be able to just swipe along at any list that you've pinned. So in an ideal world, you're gonna have all 5 of your lists that I just discussed, and you'll just be able to swipe through them. So if you're at a bus stop, if you're standing in line somewhere, you can pull out your mobile phone and just swipe through these and actually kind of like just get up to speed on what's going on. So we've added this list, and that gives you a starting point. And that's what I would recommend you do for this and for the other 4 that I mentioned. The second way I would recommend using Twitter, really to your advantage, is using a desktop app called Tweetdeck. So this is Tweetdeck. What I've done is I've just kind of emptied out my columns in there, what I've had in there before, so we can just sort of look at the new stuff here. So what you would do is you would hit this plus sign to add column, go to lists, and we're looking for Marketing 101. We add the column, exit, and here we go. So we have one column here with our marketing list. We would then have another column with our finance list, another column with business news, and so forth. And what this lets you do is it lets you, on your desktop, stay focused on the things you care about, away from your main feed, basically is another way of saying that. And you're able to sort of eyeball everything and see what new stuff has come across the feed. And so it's a really effective way to use Twitter when you're at a desktop. It's not an option for mobile, but it is for desktop. And then on mobile, as I mentioned, you pin your list and you can just swipe across. So it's pretty effective that way. The next thing we're going to talk about is Twitter search. So let's go back to my home feed here. And Twitter search is actually really, really helpful. And it's one of the things that you'll find. Initially, I didn't find it as helpful, but as I've used it more, it's become really, really helpful. What happens with Tweetdeck is you're able to stay current on everything going on right now. So you're able to see what is coming across the people's feeds at this point in time. But things disappear really quickly and really easily, right? Because there's a lot of new tweets coming out. So what Twitter search does is it lets you mine the really valuable, the really high value, or any kind of tweets. It lets you mine whatever you want, but what you probably want to focus on are the highest value tweets from the people you think are really smart, really knowledgeable, really helpful, whatever. So there are 5 things I'm going to show you here on how to use search really effectively. You can go totally down the rabbit hole and utterly master this stuff, but these are the 5 that I think will have the highest value for you. The first is using from. So the syntax is from, and then you would use the person. So let's say we're talking about me, the MBA _coach. And what this will do is show you all of my tweets. And as you see here across the top, you can have latest. If you're searching for stuff from me, you might want to go into people, and I'll show up over here. I don't think I have any photos up. Oh, I have a couple of photos of some of my Ship 30 for 30 atomic essays that I did. And I don't know if I've posted a couple of videos in links. So there you go. You can find a variety of stuff about different people on there. So that is using from. The second I would suggest is putting things in quotes. So let's say you're interested in learning about active recall. Now, individual words you can just search by themselves, and that's fine, and they'll show up. But if you want a phrase, active recall, you would put it in quotes. If you didn't put the quotes in, you would get things that have active and or that have recall. I think the syntax is for or. But now this is looking for that specific phrase. And here we go. Anything with the phrase somewhere in here as active recall. But the level up is to use things in combination. So now, let's say we were saying from the MBA _coach, active recall. You know how that's any tweets I've put out there addressing or with the phrase active recall in it. So that's 2 we've talked about. We've talked about from and putting things in quotes. The next we're going to talk about is hashtags. And I'm going to combine that with another one that shows the most popular tweets, the most liked tweets. So we're going to use hashtag #GoBolts for all you Tampa Bay fans, and I'm going to combine that with min faves, colon, and that's the syntax there, min faves. And we're going to say 200. So a tweet that has #GoBolts, the hashtag #GoBolts in it, that people liked 200 times at least. And I'm guessing there'll be a few of these. So yeah, so we got a bunch of #GoBolts stuff. Okay. So now we've introduced hashtags, we've introduced most popular tweets. The only other thing I'll add is if you want to filter for links that take you somewhere else. So let's combine that with the from. Let's use Tim Ferriss, who's a really popular podcaster. He's got some great podcasts. And we're going to say filter for links. Let's see what that brings up. There we go. So this is a link. So it's from Tim Ferriss. And is a link to this, I guess it looks like a blog post that he put. Finally, bookmarks. So bookmarking is pretty much what you'd expect. You want to grab a tweet that you like, and say maybe this happens to be the one you like, and you press this little this button over here for share, and you click bookmark, and you're in business, and it'll put it in your bookmark folder. Now, you may want to consider getting Twitter Blue, because that was like $2.99 a month, $2.99 a month, something like that, where you can get this bookmarked a folder where you can organize your bookmarks by folder. Twitter is not sponsoring this video, by the way. If they are, maybe you should consider sponsoring some videos on my channel. But in this case, this is not a sponsored video. It's just something I use that I find useful. Finally, there are shortcut keys that I'd like to show you. If you've watched some of my videos, you know I'm a big believer in shortcuts. They save massive amounts of time, so much more time than people realize. The first one is to use the / key in order to get to the search bar. And I'm going to click that, and you'll see the search bar popped up over there. Let me escape and get out of it. I'll hit the / key again, and you see there we go. The second one that I want to show you is a shortcut to get to your lists. You press G, then I, and there you go. We're at lists. And then finally, or actually almost finally, we're going to go to G, then P, which will take you to your profile. And then finally, the last one I want to show you is using the space bar to move down. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked it, you're going to like this video up here where I go into how to answer some tough interview questions. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.